Okay, so today we're going to focus on static camera work for our stories. We're going to focus on how to get the most dynamic shots and how to frame your subjects in order to communicate your story. We're not going to do any camera movement today. We're going to reserve that for next week. But right now, if you grabbed the source material, the folder here was the 3D CT Lecture 7 Composition DOF folder off of the comp. I have some utilities in here. I've got this little rule of thirds image, which we're going to use. I'm going to use that to explain how the rule of thirds works. We also have a handout here where, there it is, Norman shot composition. And let me just save this real fast to a JPEG for you guys so that we can distribute this thing a little bit easier. Actually, you guys just open it up in Photoshop and just save a JPEG of it, because I forgot to do that.
Which one, Norman shot? Yeah.
Is the Norman shot composition 2.
2?
Yep. Okay, and so I'm just going to bake this thing down and save it as a JPEG. I should have done that, but I missed it. So I'm going to flatten the image, and then I'm going to save it. Okay, what this image basically is showing you or illustrating, I'm going to open it up in an easier viewer here, is the different types of shot composition that we have for human subjects, basically. And the line here basically denotes from the head to the toe what percentage of your character is in the shot. So if your character is in the shot full, that is a full shot or a long shot. And typically the character's feet are in frame and there's a little bit of headroom on the frame. All right. And I just want to cycle, I'm going to go through all of these different shots and show you what they are in 3D and how they look. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Maya. And if you guys want to follow along with this, you're more than welcome. I'm going to open up my scene, which is also in that folder. There is the Norman and Leo template. I'm going to open that up. Okay, and we have our familiar little Norman guy that you guys have used for character animation and pretty much everything else. So I'm going to keep using him. All right, one thing that we want to do when we're going to compose our shots for real is we want to go into the view settings. So what I have here is I have my perspective camera. I'm going to maximize that. And I want to go into the view settings. And under the camera settings, I want to turn a few things on. So I'm going to rip this little dialog off. So that was view, camera settings, and I rip that guy off. And what we want to look at is we want to see I'm going to turn it to no gate. So this is what you guys see by default. If we turn on the resolution gate, what we're actually going to see is we're going to see the exact resolution as this image would be rendered in a 2D image from the renderer. And so I can prove that by simply clicking on the render and check it out. It matches this 100%. So whenever we want to compose a shot inside of Maya and have complete artistic control over what we're getting, you want to turn on the resolution gate so that you can see that frame and know that that's exactly what you're going to see. The other thing I want you guys to do immediately, because all our images from here on out, actually since the beginning of this class, need to be, I'm going to open up the render settings and I'm going to go to the Common tab, and I want to use, under the presets, HD 720. And HD 720 is basically a widely used HD format that is essentially 1280 pixels by 720 pixels, all right? That's kind of it's a high enough resolution image that it will hold up and look good on HD televisions, but it's a low enough resolution that we won't kill you guys with render time, all right? That's why we choose that. All right, so HD 720, and if you'll notice here, the moment I change that, my little readout above my camera says 1280 by 720, telling me that I'm in the correct resolution, and I'm going to go ahead and say close. A few other things we have here is we have, if we click on this button, we have safe action. What does that mean? Safe action. Any ideas?
Is that for like lower resolution monitors?
Yeah, what it is this is kind of a holdover from the pre-HD TV world. And a lot of these televisions still do exist out there, and so you still have to be mindful of this. What this little box is essentially what a normal like cathode ray tube television, like the cheap-ass ones you see at Walmart or Kmart, that are now, they're like $25 or something stupid. Those TVs will not display the entire image. And so all those TVs kind of crop the frame a little bit. And so that's what this little guy denotes right there, is that's kind of if you're going to have action in the frame, so your character is going to be moving or a car is going to be flying across the scene, you want to be sure that your action doesn't exceed that margin or doesn't exceed that margin by too much, because if you acted like this was the top of your frame and this was the bottom of your frame, your character would actually be cropped here and here on an older TV, okay? That's kind of the minimal amount of crop on an older CRT TV. And then there's another one called Safe Title, and this is kind of the maximum crop. So some of these TVs are really bad and they crop even more of the frame, and that's what the title safe border is, okay? So if you're going to do titles or text, if you want to be really safe and have that text be readable on any television that's going to display it, it has to be within this margin here. And you want to be a little bit mindful of that. These days are kind of gone because on computers, there's no crop. You see it exactly as it is. On HD TVs, there's still a little bit of crop. On my plasma, it's probably like a 2 or 5% crop. But these days are waning, but you do have to be aware of it because there is, depending on your display, there is a little bit of crop. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn those off. All right, so I want to go through all the shots here. So I'm going to go back to my little handout here. We have a full shot or a long shot, and that's basically this right here. We got the character's feet in frame and the character's head in frame. You want to not make this mistake. This is often what people new to cameras will do, is they'll leave their character with way too much headroom in a shot. You don't want to do that. You want to position your character so it either just about fills the frame, or even the thing about camera composition is it's kind of subjective. So some people like to always touch the margin of the border a little bit. There's really no rules. I just want to show you what the shots are and then give a name to them, so that when we're talking to each other, if I say, I think a full shot or a long shot is going to look best on that, you know that I'm talking about the character full in frame, okay? All right, the next one is the medium full shot. And so medium full shot is your character's head in frame and then cropped to about the knees. So this is it. I'm going to come in here, medium, full, something like that. And then if I render that out, there we go. There it is. All right, next one is the medium shot. And the medium shot is basically just below the waist here. This is often also referred to sometimes as a cowboy close-up, because we don't crop the character right there at the pelvis. We actually leave a little room so you can see where he draws his guns. That's basically what that is. And then we have a medium close shot, and I may as well just render each one of these so you can see. So by having the resolution gate showing, we can see that I'm getting exactly what I'm seeing over here. Render that out. Okay, and then I'm going to go into the next shot, which is about at the waist up to the head. And this one is the medium close. Okay, we'll go ahead and render that out. Go to the next one. We have the wide close-up, and so wide close-up is about chest level to the top of the head. So I'm going to come in here, render that one out, something like that. And then we have the full close-up, which is basically the character's head in frame with a little bit of room above the head and below the chin, like that. At this point, once you get past the close shot, the closer you get to your character, the more insight the audience is going to get in terms of the inner working of the character's mind. This brings your camera a little bit more into your character's world, and it creates a little bit more intimate relationship with the character. All right. So I'm going to keep going. We got the full close-up. Then we have a medium close-up. So a medium close-up is where the character's face is in frame and you're kind of cropping the head and the chin, like so. And then finally, we have an extreme close-up, which is when you're kind of going in like this, eyes, mouth. This often gets confused. Extreme close-up gets confused with macro, or I've sometimes heard people refer to it as ultra close-up. The word I want to use for this is macro close-up, because what we're doing is we're getting right in there. So this is a classic macro close-up used in film, where we get right in to the character's eyes, full frame. This can also be used to feature things, like if your character's wearing a ring or a watch or something, you can do a macro close-up if you want to show off a detail that you want to generate or draw attention to. And those are the different types of shots that we have at our disposal regarding characters. There's another one which I have not mentioned, which I don't actually have an example for, which is an establishing shot or a long shot. An establishing shot is basically a shot of your entire environment, and it's often an exterior shot of just showing, this is my world, and then typically you'll have your character someplace in there or not, and then that basically says this is the global environment for where all my action is going to take place. All right. Okay, so those are the types of shots we have. Now let's talk a little bit about composition and what makes an interesting or good composition. All right. So how many of you guys out there have heard of the rule of thirds?
I've actually studied
Oh.
back at class back at RCC.
So what is the rule of thirds?
Basically, segmented angles from pretty much 1/3 to full shots.
Yeah, basically what you do is you divide the frame, the camera frame, into thirds, both top to bottom, and then the intersections of those points are essentially where psychologically humans' eyes are supposed to be drawn to. That's the theory anyway. All right, so this actually works pretty well. It's just a general guideline. Rules, are out there, and I've seen a million movies, and some people break these rules consistently and produce wonderful pieces of work. But in general, if you're just starting out, this rule is pretty decent to follow. So what I did was I made a little cheat sheet for you guys. And so if I go to View and I say Select Camera, so I've got my perspective window selected, and then I go to View, Image Plane, and I'm going to import an image. I made a little cheater image for you guys for the rule of thirds. So I'm going to go into that folder, and right there we've got that rule of thirds, TIFF, and I'm going to import that. And what this guy has is I've actually included the action safe and the title safe borders, and I've got the frame segmented into thirds, and the intersection of those thirds are right here at these little crosshairs. And you might be saying, why is my character behind, or why is that behind my character? And that's because I imported this image plane, and if I can see it, the image plane is currently behind my character. So what I need to do is I need to select my camera, and then I'm going to go into the channel box, and I'm going to go into, actually I want to select that image plane. I'm going to select the image plane, and I want to go into the channel box, and I want to change the depth to something very small. And so my camera is over here. There's my little green camera. There's my image plane, which was behind my character, and now it's in front. And if I give this thing a very small depth, I can actually shrink it until it kind of disappears into the camera. So I'm going to keep going. And I'm going to just bake it right inside of my camera so it's kind of always there. So if you guys want to use this as kind of a reference at first when you're kind of deciding your shots, I say knock yourselves out. So I'm going to put the depth here on this thing to a 0.1. And then I'm just going to kind of use this as my guide so it's always there. So for example, if I wanted to do a extreme close-up of my character and I wanted you to pay attention to his eyes, right? Or his left eye in this case, then I would want to use the rule of thirds and say, okay, I'm going to put that crosshair right there on that eye or thereabouts. And so the theory is that my audience is going to pay attention to this. Theory or not, it actually works. It produces pretty decent shots. And it keeps you from doing stupid stuff like having way too much headroom, right? Because if we know the rule of thirds and these are the areas of interest, would you compose your shot like that? Unless you really want me to look at the top of his head, right? But in this case, you'd probably want to change the angle so that we filled out more of the frame. Okay? And so you can use this little rule of thirds guy to help you compose your shots or until you get used to it. All right, whenever you guys are going to think about a shot for your story, so we've drawn this out in our animatic and that was 2 dimensions, but now we're going into 3 dimensions. The first thing you want to ask yourself for each shot is what's the best angle for this shot, okay? And then the next thing is what is the best shot size? So what do I mean by the best angle for the shot?
Visually, it looks good.
Yeah, I'm like, essentially, what is this angle with respect to my character right now? No, that's a type of shot. This is, what's the angle? So the angle of the camera is basically the 3-dimensional angle with respect to the subject. The shot is how much of the subject is in frame, okay? So what is my angle right now on this subject? It's pretty much 0. I'm like straight on, okay? And typically things that are flat or straight on are going to give you the most uninteresting composition or the most uninteresting shot. And so you kind of always want to tilt things so that, for example, if you were just to look at this guy's head as a box, so if I reduce this to a box, this would be the front of the box and his side of the head would be the side of the box. So you can just reduce things to boxes and say, I should be able to see 2 sides of whatever it is in my frame, and that's going to produce a much more pleasing shot than if I'm straight on, okay, in general. Now, straight on is good for certain things. If you want to create tension or for heightened artistic effect, but in general, if there's no reason for your camera to be straight on, it's better for you to get a slight angle on the subject rather than flat, like so, okay? All right, so then the next thing I want to talk about is field of view. And what is a field of view?
How much you can see within your range.
Yeah, it basically relates to the zoom of the camera lens. And so the way it works is if we're zoomed in, we have a long lens or a long field of view, and narrow field of view. And if we're zoomed out, we have a short lens or a wide field of view, okay? And so field of view is very important. How many of you guys have actually shot a camera or know anything about photography? Okay, very few. I always find that in the computer classes. Field of view is very important. So I'll give you guys some general guidelines in terms of just types of lenses that are used, all right? So field of view is basically how wide or narrow your shot is going to be. And at this point, I'm going to put something in my scene just so we have a box or something in here. And that's a little too big. Oh, crap. I just made it nerves. Create polygon primitives cube. There we go. Okay.
Is it kind of like widening
Something's up with my scene.
widening the lens?
It's like, yeah. Oh, there we go. I want to give this guy like an environment. And then I'm going to just create some pillars in the background. So let's see here. Create cylinders. And I'm just going to make like 3 pillars here so that I can show you. All right, so now I got my guy in a scene here. And we got our pillars in the background. And I'm going to frame him up so that we're going to do a full shot. And I kind of want you to pay attention to him, so I'm going to put him on that right crosshair. Okay. And then I'll go a little bit closer. I'll roll the dice in terms of my action save and say the majority of my viewers are going to be on HD screens or computers, so I don't really have to be so concerned with the action save and the title save. All right. And now I'm going to go in here and select my camera, and I want to play with the field of view. So how many of you guys have used like a point and shoot camera that had a zoom on it? Nobody? Wow.
Point shoot camera with the zoom. Like,
Yeah, with the zoom.
Yeah, I did it.
Okay, so the way this works is I've got my camera selected, so I went to View, Select Camera, and I'm going to go to the focal length, which is basically the zoom on your virtual lens. And so what I'm doing is I'm zooming out and I'm zooming in. So if you'll notice as I zoom out and the focal length becomes shorter, I'm getting a lot more perspective on my frame. And so what the focal length, the short focal length does is it kind of makes your objects very dynamic, and it makes them seem like they're bigger than they are. So if you've ever seen like real estate photos and you look at them and you're like, oh wow, that house looks pretty cool, and then you go and actually see the house or the room or the building, and you're like, you get there and you're like, holy crap, this is small. They've essentially tricked you into thinking that it's larger than it is by using a wide angle lens. All right, so you can go crazy. This is like Beastie Boys level, and you can get all sorts of whoa, crazy distortion effects. That's super low focal length. I'm like, I don't even know if that exists in the real world. So I have a bunch of machine vision lenses at home, which are crazy focal lengths. And the widest one I have right now, and I think I have one of the wider ones, is 6 millimeters. So this is 2.5. There probably is a 2.5 out there. I could probably find it. But the widest angle lens I currently have in my bag of tricks is a 6 millimeter. And so that's pretty freaking extreme. All right, so this is an actual real world lens. You could go out and get a 6 millimeter. Going up, so this is considered a fisheye lens. Anything below, say 12 millimeters in the focal length is fisheye. And then I'll go to 12 because that's kind of the beginning of the fisheye. So there's beginning fisheye. And then we've got, up from there, we'll go into what's considered a wide angle lens. So the start of the wide angles is about 20, not 240, is about 24. So 24 millimeter lens is the start of a wide angle, but not fisheye. And so 24 is actually a decent lens for you guys to use. If you've got a smaller space and you want to make it look a little bit bigger, 24 is good. 24 on a close-up, you might start getting a little bit more perspective than you want, although this doesn't look too bad. So 24 is okay. Standard photography, so most stuff that's shot, I think if you pull, just do a Google search for what's the most common 35 millimeter prime lens, and it's probably going to be a 35 millimeter. It's probably a toss-up between a 35 and a 50. So I'm going to select the camera, and I'm just giving you a rundown of all the standard lenses that are used on digital SLRs. So 24, it's a good lens, it's kind of wide angle. The next one up is probably a 35. 35 is really nice. Gets you some decent perspective, but not too much. Things look pretty pleasing. Probably a lot of the television shows you guys watch are shot with 35s. And then we go to 50. So 50 is also kind of a standard lens. I'll go to 50 millimeters. Same deal. A lot of the entertainment you guys watch is shot in 50 millimeter, I'm sure. And then we're going to go into kind of the more telephoto. So now we're starting to get into more narrow fields of view. And it kind of jumps from 50 to 75. 75 or 70, I think it's 75. I don't actually have any 75, so it's either 72 or 75, I can't remember. Okay, 75, now we're starting to get a little narrower. And do you see what's happening to my pillars in the background? We're starting to see less of them. So as I zoom out, I can see more of the background. And as I zoom in, it basically has the effect of kind of compressing the frame or making everything seem flatter than it is. All right, so I'm going to go to 75. This is also kind of a standard lens. We're starting to get into the longer lenses. And then after 75, I think it would go like 85. That's a long lens. And then finally, we got really longer lenses are like 100. And then we got 135. I actually have one at home that's a 400. And that's kind of crazy. 400 is almost so long of a lens that it's almost an orthographic camera, because everything gets so shortened that you really start to have zero perspective almost. And if you'll notice something as I zoom back here, what just happened?
Clip through the wall.
Yeah, my camera clipped through the wall. And so I want to show you what's going on. This is my camera here. And basically my field of view on my camera, I thought there was a way to show that. I'm gonna have to look this up. There is a way for you to see the field of view in frame. But basically what's happening is my field of view is so narrow that my camera is actually back across the room where it's almost ready to come out of the room. And if I take this camera up to a higher focal length, say 500, and I just back up a little bit more, my camera is actually going to go outside the room. So the way it works is if you're shooting in a tight space, you're going to want to use a wider angle lens. All right. So I'm going to bring this back down to a reasonable. I kind of like a 35 or 24. For me, for my money, those are the good artistic lenses. So I'm going to say view, select camera. So if you wanted to, you don't want to get too fancy with your lenses, you could probably shoot your entire project at a 35 and get pretty decent results. All right. Okay, so does that make sense? Field of view? Okay. And so field of view is often used. I'm going to unhide my other characters so I can show you kind of the effect of this. And I think I'm going to just hide my box there, but I'm going to unhide my Leo character. Oh, where did he go? There he is. And I want to kind of show you how this works in relation to having two subjects in the scene. So I'm going to rotate this guy around. And I'm going to move my Norman forward. And I'm going to put my Leo in here behind him. And maybe the shot is, I don't know, something like Leo's behind him. We don't know if he's sneaking up on him or what, right? But here's that shot with a 35 millimeter lens. And I'm just going to go ahead and render that out. Okay. My view plane is going to show up in the render. In order for it not, I'd have to get rid of it. So if you're going to render, if you're going to use that as a guide, you're going to want to get rid of that before you start rendering out. I'm going to leave it though for now. And so that's bad composition because I should be using the rule of thirds. So I'm going to put my character on the third line here. You don't have to be so meticulous like to get it so that these guys are both composed on the third lines. It's just that whatever you want your audience to focus on, you should have on one of these third lines. So either here or here. And then this guy, it's fine to have him sneaking up from behind. All right, so he's sneaking up from behind, and I'm shooting this right now with a wide angle lens. Watch what happens and I'm going to save this. So I'm going to click on Keep Image. Watch what happens when I change my field of view. So I'm going to say Select Camera, and I'm going to increase my focal length to something like a 75. And then I'm going to render that again. Okay? What just happened? Did I move the lion closer to the guy?
Yes.
No, I didn't.
The camera moved the line closer to the guy.
The camera didn't do anything. The camera is just photographing the scene, but the longer lens, so going from a 35 to a 75, compressed the frame. So it took what was showing a broad depth and basically it made everything look shorter. So the way you want to think of this is if you ever want to compress the frame and create tension or make things seem like they're closer together, you're going to want to use a longer lens. And if you want to make things seem like they're farther apart, you're going to use a wider angle lens. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to 135, and I'm going to recompose that, and I'm going to shoot it again. And now we're going to get the feeling as if the lion is essentially right behind him, even though he's, I don't even know how many feet. If I go back to my scene, he's a good 10, 12 feet away from my lead character. All right, so you want to use, you're just going to use the lens and the focal length to help you set the mood. Okay, in this case, if I wanted him to be sneaking up behind, I'd probably go with which lens?
75.
I'd probably go with the longer lens, right? I might even do a field of view pull where I basically am going from a wide angle and then zooming down, right? To give the feeling like the lion's about ready to encroach and get him. So we'll do that next week. We're going to cover doing camera moves. All right, now I want to lead into, this is a great place for me to talk about depth of field. So what is depth of field? Those of you guys who have shot cameras and understand photography a little bit.
Depth of field is basically a blur. Like
Yes.
basically a blur to block out the image.
Yeah, that's how it's used. So depth of field is basically a limitation of camera lenses. So a camera lens can only focus in on one point. And so there's a plane that is the most prime focus for that lens at that distance. And you can imagine that plane to be, say, the front of my Norman character's face here. All right? Everything past that plane to the back or to the front is going to fall off in focus. Is going to have not as sharp a focus, moving forward and back. All right? In the computer, if I render this scene, notice everything is 100% in focus. This does not exist, and I assure you, because I shoot lots of practical photography.
Blu-ray.
No.
Blu-ray is dope.
This does not exist in the real world. I wish it did, because I battle this every freaking day.
I think you need no atmosphere.
No, it's the actual physics. It's the lens itself and how they bend the light rays. It's not possible to get the glass to bend the rays without distorting. Okay, so everything, if you'll notice, is in focus here. So what depth of field is it's basically a real world attribute that we apply to a 3D world to make it seem like it's more real. So in the real world, I could focus on Norman's face, but Leo here in the background would get blurred to some extent. And then, what is that crap? And then anything in the foreground would also get blurred. So in Maya, it's very, very easy to set up depth of field. I'm going to show you how to do it. First thing we need to do in order to use it is we need to go into, first select the camera. Actually, I don't have to have the camera selected. And then I'm going to go into display. And I'm going to go into heads up display. And the one I'm looking for is called, where is it? I think it's object details. There it is. And so object details, if you'll see it here in the heads up display, is going to give me a readout on how far my object is from the camera. So what I've done is I've just selected this little locator on my character's nose. And it says that distance from camera for that object is 50.857. Okay? So just remember that. Then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to select the camera. And I'm going to go into the attributes for that camera. And every camera has a little nifty utility right here called depth of field. And all I need to do in order to access that is turn it on. So I'm going to turn it on. And does anyone remember what my distance was? 50.857. All right, so I'm going to say view, select camera. I'm going to go into the depth of field and I'm going to say, okay, my focal distance is roughly 50.8. I'm going to enter that in. And then if you'll notice here, the f-stop is 5.6. And so without getting into lenses too much, I gave you focal lengths. F-stops are something a little bit different, which I don't really want to explain. F-stops are the aperture and how much light gets let into the lens. And the way that it works, it's kind of like a little sleeve that closes down and lets either more or less light into the lens.
It's kind of like your pupil.
Yes, it's kind of like just like your pupil. Yeah.
You take like nighttime shots, you want it bigger.
Yeah, that's essentially what the f-stop is. But all you guys need to know is that the lower the f-stop, the more depth of field you're going to get. So if I put this f-stop down to 1, what's going to happen? Chris? If I put that f-stop very low, what's going to happen to my depth of field?
Oh, it's gonna be really blurry.
It's going to be more pronounced, right?
Yeah.
And if I go to a very high f-stop, what's going to happen?
It's gonna be very much, very crisp.
I'm going to have almost no depth of field. So I'm going to go ahead and try that. I'm going to set it to 64, which is the top, and I'm going to hit render. And see, we get a slight, it's actually not that bad. Can you guys see out there that the character's face is in focus, but Leo here in the background is starting to be blurred a little bit? And so if I want to pronounce that effect, I'm going to change, I don't even think there's no such thing as a 64 f-stop. I don't have a single camera. The highest mine will go is like 30-something, 32. So that's highly unreal there. There probably is, though, otherwise they wouldn't have it in there. So general f-stops, just so you guys are aware, if you do want to be close to the way it works in the real world. The lowest f-stop I have on a lens at home, on one of my machine vision lenses, is a 1.2. And so if I go to 1.2, what's going to happen? It's going to be ridiculous, right? Look at that. So my subject's almost completely blurred out of focus. And even that plane on my character's face, in the front of the face, is very small. So even just the stuff just past the very focal plane is already starting to get blurred. So this is a use. How many of you guys have seen like miniature photography? Macro photography, where you shoot like, and what happens in pretty much all macro photography? It gets very blurry because at that scale, it's nearly impossible. The focal planes, focal distances at that level are so tiny, they're like down to a millimeter. And so there is also another setting on this, which is the focal plane. So if you want to emulate kind of macro photography, so for example, Dana, you're seeing you have kind of this little tiny fairy, and so you might actually use a lower f-stop to kind of generate the effect to make her feel small in relation to the rest of the scene. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to set this to something more reasonable. The lower the f-stop, the higher quality the lens. So that's kind of, if you ever see a lens that goes down past 1.2, that's going to be at least over $2,000, I can assure you. The one I have, I think, was about $3,000, and I think mine goes down to like 1.2. All right, so but typically lower f-stop for decent depth of field, 5.6 is a good one. So I'm going to render that out. See, that's a little bit better. And then you can go up to like f11. We'll get a little bit less. Okay, but for us, we're in the computer now, and so I'm trying to give you some real-world examples. You don't care, and they don't really mean anything because this is just emulating what's happening in the real world. So for us in this world, in creation of our stories and shot composition, we're more concerned about just getting an artistic look that's pleasing. So the other cool thing that you can do in here, which you can't do in the real world, is you can expand your region of focus. So we have the focus region scale, and I'm going to have Chris take a stab at this. Chris, what do you think that does? Because we have focus distance, we had the f-stop, This guy, what do you think that does? The region scale.
Region scales a certain region.
Good one.
If you get that blurry tiger, it gets even more blurrier.
I can actually expand the field of the focal plane.
Basically, the focal vision.
Yeah, so right now the foreground and background elements that are going to be in and out of focus, I can expand that. So it's kind of like using a higher f-stop. So I'm going to just leave that f-stop at 11, and I'm going to change the region scale from 2 to 4 and watch what happens. My tiger in the background is going to get a little bit more in focus. And so what I'm doing is I'm basically expanding the region. So I have the focal plane, and then I got the in and out of focus on either side, and I'm making that area larger. So it's kind of something that, again, I wish I could do in the real world, but this is something that you're only going to be able to do in the 3D fake world. Okay, the next thing that I want to show you guys, this is very useful. You already heard me today in class talking to a lot of you guys about how you're going to use depth of field to achieve certain effects. Just remember that if you're going to photograph something very small, the smaller the thing is, the more you're going to want to use depth of field, because that's what happens in the real world. If you photograph small things, they're going to have more depth of field on the lens. That's just the way it exists. And we see this in entertainment day in and day out. And so our brains are sensitive to it even if we're not aware of it. Okay? So I want you guys to keep that in mind. All right, the next thing we want to do is I want to talk about lead room. And so lead room, I'm going to hide Leo here for a second. Lead room is basically if you have a character or a vehicle or something, and that object, let's just say character or object, is traveling across the frame at any velocity. What you want to do is, whatever direction they're traveling in, you want to give them lead room on the other side. So if my guy was walking from frame right to frame left, I want to give him plenty of lead room so that he can enter the scene and then have enough room to walk so that the camera's not lagging behind him. And then I would do the same thing from the other side. All right, that's very important. You want to give your objects that are moving plenty of lead room. All right, the next thing I want to discuss, and I'm going to bring Leo back for this, is the 180 rule. And so I always had a hard time with this one when I was in school, and what happened was no one explained it well enough. And so none of us really understood how it worked. And it was kind of funny, comical now looking back, because there were a lot of stupid conversations about breaking the 180 rule and when you shouldn't do it and why and all this stuff. And it's really just so much simpler than that. I just want to show you what the 180 rule is. All right, so in this case, the 180 rule is typically used in conversations between characters. And I want to just see what you guys think. What's the 180 rule? Yeah, it's like in a conversation, if you want to shoot the characters talking to each other over the shoulder. But what does it mean?
Continuity?
Yeah, it's got to do with shot continuity. See, no one. this is how it went at my school too.
Which enhances a certain degree with turning around characters.
Yeah, I'm going to break it down very, very even simpler than all of that. Okay, we're going to take my lead character, who happens to be Norma, and we're going to establish his line of sight or who he's talking to. That's all we need to do. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, this right here is Norman, and he's talking to Leo. And I'm going to use a NURBS curve. I'm going to create a CV curve. And I'm going to say, this is basically his path to that dude. And of course, I'm using a level 3 curve, so I got to draw 4. There we go. So that's essentially it. That's his line of sight to the character he's talking to. Okay, what this means now is that, and I'm going to frame up my shot here. So I got Norman, and he's talking to Leo, like so. And then I want to show my camera. Where is my damn camera? There it is. Okay, I want to use a wider angle for this so that we can see the camera in relation to the subjects a little bit easier. So I'm going to select that camera. Where is it? View, select camera. And I want to use a wider angle because right now I have a 135. And that's why my camera is so far away from my subject. So I'm going to change that to say like a 24. And watch what happens when I move now my camera's going to be right there, right behind my guys, which is going to allow me to explain this. Okay, so I got my camera and I got my line. This line establishes the 180 rule. And it's this simple. Once you have that line established, you can't cross it. So where's my camera right now with respect to that line? On the left side. That means that if I'm going to do dialogue and I'm going to exchange shots between these two characters, I can't change that. So I'm just going to render this and I'm going to show you what happens. So right now my camera is on the left side and I'm going to render a frame. And then I'm going to save it. All right. And then I'm going to jump the line now. So now I'm going to go over to Leo. I don't know why it won't. Okay, I'm going to go over to Leo, and I'm going to jump the line. So here's my camera, and I'm going to come around to the other side of that line, and I'm going to render that out. All right, and then I'm going to save that, dude. And now watch what happens as I toggle between these two frames. There's my original frame where I was on the back side of Norman, and then there's my other frame where I go to the other side of Leo. It appears as though my character has swapped to the other side of the frame. I know it's subtle, and I'm a little bit less sensitive to this than a lot of people are, but it looks like Norman, who's on frame right here, and when I switch the camera, he jumps to frame left. And so that's going to be jarring. And so watch what happens if I do that shot again, but I'm mindful of the 180 rule. I'm going to come over here behind Leo, and I'm going to render this one. And then I'm going to save it. And so basically this is our original shot. I'm going to go to the one that's incorrect, and they're the one that's correct. Where is it? So there. Norman is on the left side of the frame. And if I don't break the 180 plane, he stays on the left side of the frame. That's all there is to it. Okay? Now, that rule can also be broken as long as you set it up correctly. So there are going to be cases where you're going to shatter that thing. It's just going to be a matter of you're going to have to set it up correctly so that it's not so jarring. But in general, if you're doing dialogue between two characters, you really do want to be mindful of that 180 line. Because if you break it, it is going to look weird, and we'll bust you on that next week for sure. Okay, that's kind of it in a nutshell. That's basic camera composition. Again, you want to ask yourself, so as you're translating your animatic into your 3D, you always want to ask yourself two questions. What's the best angle to tell this story? What's the best angle for this shot? And then what's the best shot size or the best composition? And so the composition is basically this guy, full shot to macro close-up, and then the camera angle is essentially what is your angle with respect to your subject. Oh, I didn't talk about this. So camera angle also can be used to give your character power or make them weak. And so I'm glad I just thought of that. Camera angle typically is going to be at eye level when you're telling your story. So you're going to leave your camera at eye level. That allows the viewer to feel like they're part of the story and they're looking that character in the eye. You can also use the camera to create tension. And so if I go with a lower angle on my character, that's going to make my character in general seem like he's more powerful. If I go with a higher angle on my character, in general, that's going to make my character seem weaker. And then we also have the ability to Dutch the angle or use an oblique angle. And we can do that by going to View, Camera Tools, and I'm going to use the Roll tool here. And the Roll allows us to kind of Dutch the angle. And so if we wanted to kind of skew the frame a little bit to create tension or create some sort of an effect, dynamic effect, you can use the roll tool to do that. Another way to do that, I'll just undo all that, because sometimes that roll tool gets a little out of hand. And unfortunately, it's not allowing me to undo. As I said, it gets out of hand. I'm going to select the camera. If I want to zero my camera again, I'm just going to select rotate XYZ and hit 0. And there, my frame's going to be zeroed out again. You can also just use the actual camera's rotation controls. So if I wanted to Dutch that camera, that's referred to as a Dutch angle. If I wanted to Dutch that camera, I could also select the camera itself and then just hit the E key and then use the blue rotate. I actually prefer this method better than using the roll tool. Sometimes a slight angle, because things are not perfect in the real world. And so as much as they try to get the camera 100% flat, it's often never that way. And so as much real world mistakes that you can put into your CG scene, the better it's basically going to be, the more real it's going to look. Okay? And so that's basically it. Those are your rules and your general guidelines. I don't like rules because I think rules are made to be broken, especially when it comes to this. This is a highly subjective area, cinematography. It's really just about you knowing the tools. I've given you the tools at your disposal, and then now you creatively assemble them and try to come up with something new that that no one's seen and interesting. And that's really what the best artists do. All right, so I'll conclude that portion of the video.